Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, welcome again, everyone, to today's webinar. Our session today is called The Owner's Mindset, Fostering Success at Every Age. I'm going to give us a little orientation to our session today, and then we'll meet our presenters, and we'll be off to the races on today's discussion. This is an interactive discussion. You have functions in the Zoom interface that will allow you to ask questions during today's program. You can submit questions at any time. We do have time allocated at the end of this program to spend time on your questions and get to the topics that you most want to talk about. Also, you should know that the program is being recorded and will be sent to you in a follow-up email about 48 hours after this session. So if by any chance you do not receive that email, please do reach out to us. We're happy to send it along, but that will come to you automatically after the program. It's important to note that we value confidentiality. In our sessions, we talk about real family situations, and we also want to protect real family information. And so cases and examples have either been fictionalized or aggregates of different family situations, or we've been given permission to share them. We also, to protect people who would like to ask questions candidly, will not announce you by name, so you can feel free to ask questions that are on your mind, and we'll respond to them in a general way in this session. This is also an educational dialogue. So as always, these are ideas, concepts that may be valuable to you. You should talk to your own advisors to figure out what is the best way to apply this to your family situation. And with that, we're going to meet our presenters. So we have three talented and committed folks here with us today to talk about our topic. First, Wendy Sage-Hayward. Hi, Wendy. Welcome.
Hi, welcome. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today with everyone. Thanks, Christy.
Barbara Dartt is our second presenter.
Hello, glad to be here.
And Gaia Marchisio is with us today as well.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I know that you will hear a lot of thank you today. Bear with me. I value gratitude, so it's important for me to say thanks to Wendy and Barb for inviting me to be part of this project and living through the idea that we are stronger together. And I also want to say thank to Christy and FBCG for the support throughout the process and for organizing this.
We're super excited to have this discussion today. So Wendy and Barb are colleagues of mine at FBCG. My name is Christy Data. I am the president and CEO of FBCG. Wendy and Barb are consultants working with families. Gaia is the senior lecturer and academic director for the Global Family Enterprise Program at Columbia Business School. And while each of our presenters today, I think, had a unique path to learning about, committing to serving, educating family businesses in academic settings and in consulting settings and lots of different places, I think what brings us together today is a shared passion and belief in the importance of cultivating effective ownership for families as part of achieving their long-term vision. So I think you're going to get a little bit of a flavor of the experiences and perspectives that each of our presenters bring to the table. And we're going to talk a little bit about this in the context of the new book that these three have put together called Own It, which we'll share some more about later, which is, I think, truly a labor of love and a fantastic resource for families all around the world. So with that, we're going to get into a discussion. So the book that you all have written stems in part from one key observation, which is that families often talk about business. They talk about the family. Sometimes they talk about the board of directors, but they may not be talking as deeply about issues of ownership. So why don't we start with you, Wendy? Can you share with us why ownership as a topic is so important, and what are the roles that owners uniquely play?
Yeah, wonderful. Well, a couple of things. So first, I think in terms of why the topic of ownership is so important is exactly what you point out, is that we don't focus on it. And yet it is one of the more complex part of a family enterprise. It's so much more than just the numbers, right? There's this complexity of role, which I'll talk about in a minute. And it's also about legacy, and it's highly emotional. And when I think about my own journey to becoming an owner in my family enterprise, my dad's family enterprise, where I was Gen 5, my grandmother passed away on Christmas Day, and then my dad passed away 3 months later. So transition had never actually happened to my dad's generation. And then the journey to becoming an owner for my mother and my sisters and I was, we had to find this 100-year-old trust document. It was a last man standing trust document, and learning about what a trust document was, because at that, this was, almost 30 years ago, had no idea at that stage of my life even what a trust was. And so that preparation for understanding the complexity of being an owner, it involves shareholders agreements and dividends and wills and estate planning and just all of the complexity that particular system requires, that skillfulness for understanding that role and really being capable in that role. And so I think when Barb and Gaia and I started talking about this idea of sort of writing a book about ownership, it was really about building that skillfulness over the generations and the importance of being able to do that. I think that when we want to develop ownership, sometimes what I hear from families is that, well, we don't need to start that until they're older. But really, the notion of ownership and the sense of responsibility and care and legacy that's required really can start at a very young age, even if they're doing a lemonade stand, helping them understand what does that really mean? And you can think about cost of goods sold, what does the cost of the lemons and making the lemonade, and then what's the revenue you're bringing in, and then what's the profits, and really helping them understand, and then what are you going to do with your profits, and how is that going to serve your life? So starting really at an early age, even understanding some of those notions, I think can be very helpful.
Wendy, I would add that, one of the things that prompted me to think about trying to help people in family enterprise think about ownership earlier really was the idea that it's very technical and complex, as you pointed out. The reps that you get to practice ownership, they just are few and far between, and they should be. Owners shouldn't be showing up every week or really every month to have their fingers, at least not with that hat on. If you also have a board hat and a management hat, perhaps you do some things weekly or monthly. But with your owner hat on, that's much too frequent, because there's really only a few decisions that owners get to make, but they're really challenging. And one of the analogies that I've used is the wildland firefighter. When I was in college, I worked in the Forest Service for summers, and I got trained as a wildland firefighter, which meant that you learned to do a lot of really physical labor, digging trenches and the like, and had some unique tools that you learned to use. And they told you, when you get called up and get sent out west, because I was here in Michigan, bring a book, because it's likely you won't even get deployed to a fire. You're going to sit around and wait. You'll have been taught all these special things. You may never go to the fire, but when you do, bring the little tent that you pull over yourself in the event that the burn back comes at you, because you could die, and you should be prepared for that level of depth of impact of your decision making. And ownership's a little bit like that. Like, all of a sudden, Wendy, you found out you were an owner. You had to make decisions about big financial stakes, about who was an owner and who wasn't an owner, about documents that were very complex. Quickly, there's a lot of urgency to them, and they have big financial stakes and big kind of emotional stakes in terms of who's included and who's excluded. And I think that's why we start as early as possible, helping folks think about what it might be like to be a family business owner, even if we aren't promising that, because the stakes are so high and the reps are few and far between. So let's start early and give people a chance to practice.
Yeah. And first, Barb, I just want to say my respect for you is already high, but now it's even higher that you're trained as a firefighter. That's pretty cool.
I never got to go.
Okay, but you were doing it. I love the fact that you were getting the training. That's fantastic. I think the other thing I would add that I think was part of our conversations in the early days is that in generation one, ownership and management are thought of as the same thing. And so we focus more, we're drawn more to the business, the operational, the day-to-day, because it's so urgent. But as you go down in the generations, ownership and management separates. And you may have some owners in the rising generation who are operating owners, but you may have some that are passive owners. And the passive owners sometimes get sidelined because they're not working in the business. And yet their role, their voice, their inclusion in thinking about strategy and legacy and strategic decisions, because of course they're also responsible for the financial side of it, right? If there's a cash injection that's required. So their voice is really important to be in there. There's risk balancers. If we come back to some of the roles that, I think owners can play, is they can be risk balancers. They're decision makers at the strategic level, at the big picture level. And when that separation happens, that sometimes those passive owners are forgotten. And how do we make sure that their voices are included, that they are knowledgeable about that role of being an owner so that they can participate in some of those decisions?
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. This is really about how do we help those folks who are owners and not in the day-to-day get connected to the business, have an positive emotional feeling, and be equipped to make decisions at the right level.
And I appreciated you called out, Barb, the idea that, potential ownership is something that's on the table. And so today's topic is on the owner's mindset, which you all have argued in the book is a fundamental to success for families. So Gaia, I think you're going to share with us a little bit about owner's mindset. Would you like me to share?
In a minute. So
Okay.
if I can give a little bit of context first, because yes, the idea of a mindset, everyone has a mindset, right? But based on theory and research, owner's mindset can really become a transformative idea and concept. But I want to make sure that we're not offering a silver bullet, as often this is important because it's a co-creation of multiple things, but this is something that is really core. So everyone has a mindset, right? Each of us in this moment on this webinar. And so a mindset is a set of beliefs and attitudes that drives and shape how we act and behave. It is about how we think, how we engage, how we conduct, and how we go through life. And so when it comes about sharing assets, this becomes very important, right, for a collection of individuals who are in the position of doing that. So what is new? Well, we want to draw your attention on the specific of your mindset, like holding the mirror, and making sure that if you have appreciation on how by shaping it, so not by default, but by design, some great things may happen. In fact, what's very interesting is that mindset shape outcomes. And so the research has shown that if you focus on changing your mindset rather than just how you behave, you have 4 times more probability to be successful in life. So this is a very important piece that was driving some of the conversation. And in addition to that, if you think about in our field, we have been spending so much time, and rightfully so, on this idea of family values. And this is very important. But what is fascinating is that the sets of beliefs making up for the mindset is actually what informs our values, right? Which by they're influencing how we act in life. And so if you want to bring that up now, the slide would be fantastic, Christy. Thank you. So what's the distinction between values and beliefs? And so values are what we think is important in our life, while belief is what we hold to be true. Whether it's true or not, that's how we go through life, right? This is the filter we have. So think about what you believe about people, and the way you find out your belief is if I give you a sentence and you finish it, like people are ... What would you put in there? Like people are good, people are bad, people are. Trust. Can you trust people? Do you believe that trust is ... Impossible, easy, right? Life is difficult, good. So however you think about this big concept, that really shape how you show up in the world. So back into our owner's mindset, some beliefs has a huge impact on how can shape some of the rules that some family has. For example, there are some family who believe that only family member that works in the business can be owners, right? Is that true? I can bring you tons of examples where other family believe this opposite, but it's absolutely cares being true. So think about this belief as the iOS of your phone, right? We don't really think about the operating system. We always want to buy the new and the newest phone. We remember about the operating system when Apple sent us an annoying reminder that you have to update it. And so we want you to think about what is helping, what is operating in the back, your family and your owners and your ability to share assets. So these beliefs are not right or wrong. This is very important because we tend to think in terms of right or wrong. And so what we would like for you to think about how the belief that we have as a family actually support us in any given moment, or they get in the way for whatever we need. So based on this, Wendy, Barbara, and I have reviewed both the literature, and we went through many cases across the world to identify what we believe are a belief system that actually helps family and owners being successful across time. And so the idea is to think about a few of them. Well, the first one is family and therefore owners who believe that continuous development is important, and therefore, if I believe that, I see growth as a continuous opportunity to learn. It is something that I can do as an individual. Is it something that we engage the family as a whole? And so we want intentionally to build skills, knowledge, connection. It's not a burden, but it's something that makes us grow and be better together. And this has a huge impact. For example, think about if you have a conflict and you believe in continuous growth, that in itself becomes not the end of a relationship, but the opportunity to make that better and growing that. The second one is about believing that ownership is a deep commitment and responsibility. Wendy was mentioning that, and Barbara was reinforcing that. If I believe that being an owner is not just a title or a document, I am in it. I put time and effort, and that's, again, it's not a burden. It gives me energy, gives me curiosity. I see that as an opportunity to be part of that, even if I'm not an operating owner. And I want to stay engaged. I keep learning and bring the best to that. And of course, understanding the boundaries if I'm not an operating owner. Another belief that we believe is important is being proactive, right? Being proactive means thinking about the present and the future. It's about anticipating future challenges. It's about believing that undoing is way more costly, both financially and emotionally, than doing that right in the first place. We spend time with some scenario planning. We think about the unthinkable. And so that creates a huge impact in how we go around. The next one is about the abundance versus scarcity. This is a little bit of a tricky one, but so important, right? Because what we mean with that is that an abundant mindset means that I see resources as plenty and shareable. Even if I don't have them, I know that life or through work, they will show up. While if I have a scarcity mindset, I think that resources are limited, and this leads to fear and control. If I have something, I want to hold into it because I may not have it back. And so how does it show up in behaviors, right? If I have an abundant mindset, I think that sharing is natural. I believe in helping others. I want others to succeed because there is space for everyone to grow and benefit. If I have a scarcity mindset, well, I feel threatened by people and by new things. I'm reluctant to share information, and I worry about that other people will outperform me. So that gets in the way if we share assets. Diversity and inclusion. The next one, if I believe and I value different perspectives, then I see others as essential for solving problems and leading and owning together. The more the merrier, and these allow more perspective and resources. I invite people different perspective because I see that that's enriching everyone. In terms of win-win, if I believe that, again, I am more able to approach problem and challenges and hold both perspectives. And I want to make sure that I'm not maximizing one option at the expense of others, but I'm more inclusive. And as you can see, all these are connected and reinforce each other. And I think that the core of that, right, it's this idea that we believe that we're stronger together. In a way, this is, and that's the final one, I think that this is the core, and those family who hold on to that, really they have a better chance, because otherwise, why bother to share assets together if I don't believe that, or everything else becomes so much harder, right? And so owners who believe that are stronger together, they go in collaboration mode by default almost, and they value both the independence of the individual, but also working together through the strength. So are they all? Probably not, right? And for sure, it's every family has others. And again, it's not about being normative, but it's inviting each of you to hold the mirror and think about, at a deeper level, how we go through thinking about sharing assets together.
Thank you, Gaia. That was a wonderful overview of these key beliefs. Did anyone else from the panel have additional comments they wanted to share?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that core piece there at the end, which is that belief of being stronger together. And we hear families say that all the time. And I think what we wanted to do is really take that to a deeper level. What does that actually mean? And I think, Gaia, you just did a wonderful job of exploring that mindset that we believe is part of that stronger together kind of piece. Yeah.
All right, well, I think we're going to go back then into another key idea that you all developed as part of the book, and I'll put that back up on the screen, which is the timeline of development. As you noted earlier in the discussion, right, you can start early. So Wendy, share with us a little bit about the stages of development.
Sure. So when we started thinking about development over the stages, and this really is about developing that owner's mindset and building the skillfulness that we've been talking about. So it's, the mindset, but it's also the skillfulness. And so we felt that it happened really in stages over life, and that it wasn't too often, we hear, okay, well, we need to have next gen development. And it's one of those things that always, sort of, it gives me a little bit of, well, hold on, actually development isn't just for the rising gen in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. We actually learn throughout life. And I have clients who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who are learning to let go. They're learning to be great mentors. They're learning to step aside and give opportunity and support to the rising generation. And so they're learning how to do that even in their later stages of life. And so we really wanted to represent that. And we thought the best way to do that would be to map out these different stages. So as you can see, there's the young child who's, sort of 0 to 12, there's adolescent, then we have emerging adult. So that's that later teenage, early sort of 20 kind of age. And then there's an early adulthood stage. And we know that with recent neuroscience, the brain doesn't fully develop until we're 25. And then there's the middle adult stage and the later adult stage. And what we felt was that each stage had a critical theme that was part of that stage. So for example, in the young child, and I don't know if we can build the slide from here, but the young child at stage is really about the importance of diversity and inclusion. And I want to just stop there for a quick second. I won't explain the theme at every stage because it's probably too much detail for what we have time for now, but I want to highlight a couple of them. And I've had someone say to me, well, diversity, inclusion, 0 to 12, doesn't that feel like it's sort of a little early to be starting with that? Because we think of DEI now as being, we talk about it, diversity, equity, and inclusion is such a big piece that we're working on in, sort of our culture, our society, our workplaces. But really, we felt that it started there because we need to appreciate that, for example, even within a family, we have diversity. We have different skills, different personalities that show up in the sibling group, for example, or in the cousin group. You might have that crazy uncle who, there's generational differences, or the grandpa who insists that things have to be done a certain way because that's his belief system from why the business is successful. So our ability to understand and appreciate all of the different personalities, even within our family, and respect those differences. And then the idea of inclusion and the importance of making people feel like their voice is important and it's heard. And so, yeah, we felt that actually starting with diversity and inclusion from the very beginning was such a critical piece. So then as you keep moving through, we have, you know, the adolescents, and their theme is really about experimenting and building confidence and testing. There's a testing ground that happens there. And then you've got the emerging adults, and there it's about developing identity. You know, that's the next two stages are sort of where my children are at right now. I have a 26-year-old and a 24-year-old, and they're building identity. And you know what? They ended up having to reshape their identity. So that happens sometimes where they have to let go of one identity. So I have an older son who is a hockey player. He needs to give that up, and now he's actually moving into his professional life. And that's been a really big challenge in helping them manage and work through that challenge, create the level of independence, because you know, often you'll probably all remember, for those of you who are past this stage, how, you know, we want to be autonomous. We want to make our own decisions. We want to be respected by our parents as adults. And so that's the other piece that's happening here, is there's individual development that's going on, but there's also family development that's happening at the same time. And people are moving through those stages. There's multiple changes that are happening. We need to move from an adult-child relationship in these sort of these gray stages here to an adult-to-adult relationship within our families. So then if you keep moving, we've got, you know, sort of developing skill and capability. We're in our careers, we're starting our careers, we're building our professional capabilities and thinking about who we are. And then in the middle stages, there's the notion of transitions and trade-offs. So we're thinking about, you know, stepping back sometimes at that stage. We might be taking on the role of owner at that stage in a more serious way, in the sense that the senior generation is transitioning out or has passed away, and we might be taking more on. And those, we've got to have trade-offs in terms of our family and our profession and all of in our balancing ourselves. So there's a lot of balance there that we're constantly working on trade-offs. Then in the later stage, of course, it's really about letting go and really nurturing legacy and helping that rising generation become successful and setting them up for success. So in our book, you know, the book is really structured with a chapter on each of these stages, and then it's bookended by a few other things, which we'll talk about in a minute. But in each chapter, we talk about this theme. We give an example of a family in that stage. We talk about developmental goals for each of these stages at that stage of life. What are we trying to develop in that age? And then we give some ideas around how do you do that? How do you do development at that stage on a bunch of different levels, on the family level, on the individual level, on the business level, and on the ownership level. And we see all of that as part of really that skillfulness of being great owners. So I don't know, Barb and Gaia, if you want to add anything to that in terms of the stages, but yeah, it kind of gives you an overview of how the book is structured and what our intention was.
Wendy, the only thing I'd add is that we intentionally overlap the ages because people are different. I mean, we can't pinpoint any kind of emotional or other development by age, as we all know. And so that it was deliberate to do that. We were not trying to draw hard and fast lines.
Excellent. Yeah, great point, Barb. Thanks.
So we wanted to dive today into a couple of these key stages so that we can explore some of the ideas and concepts that you guys have sort of mapped out on each of these areas of the life cycle. There's two that we're going to talk about today about the opportunities for ownership development. In the book, you've explored these through stories about families. You talk about goals, you talk about how-tos and what to watch out for. One area that we frequently get questions about, Wendy, you touched on the idea of the rising gen. So in your life cycle model, you talked about emerging adults. Barb, what are a couple of goals that families might have in supporting an owner's mindset among these emerging adults? And what are some examples of how that can be cultivated?
Yeah, it's an age I'm commonly working with, and one that I think people approach us with often, folks in that age and stage, and it's the first time they're thinking about this ownership opportunity. I do think a lot of times next gens are maybe beneficial owners at that point. They maybe don't know it. I've got several families that I work with where folks have already been tapped for ownership and they don't know that. So we often call that group prospective owners, and just ignore some of those technical details and just say, hey, you are a prospective owner. You may or may not become an owner, but we think it's right for a family enterprise to prepare you for this role should you choose to accept it. In some cases, should you qualify for it? I mean, some folks put kind of some expectations down for you to actually move into this ownership role, at least voting as an owner. So a couple goals, I think, that are really important, and they really lean on Wendy's point about our main theme during that stage, and that's individuation and independence. So we've got folks in that 18 to 30 age range that are really, I mean, if they're healthy, trying to figure out who they are separate from their nuclear family. And so when that's the first time, or even if you've had family meetings, that you say to this group, hey, the family business really needs you to come to this meeting and sit for a Saturday that you were going to spend with your friends when you're home from college and sit in class because our CFO is going to come teach. I mean, there's a real challenge, not just because we might not be creating the content that engages people at that generation, but it also is a challenge because they're sort of in a spot where they're trying to push back against everything that's associated with their family. And so I think we have to be really cognizant of that and give a lot of patience and try to manage this paradox, of which there are multitudes in family business, of we need to ask folks and expect folks to show up, and we need to expect that, and we can't just ignore people who don't engage, because that's not a healthy pattern to set, and treating everybody the same regardless if they show up or not. And we also can't ding people for that kind of reluctance and challenge. And there's no easy answer to that for any family. So I think one thing I tell the families I work with in this stage is, look, let's just make them want to come back. How do we design this? How do we create? How do we find the location? How do we find the content? How do we find the delivery model so that people want to come back? We have a lot of game playing that happens in family meetings. I've got a family I work with, and mom and dad have been remarkably proactive, and they're thinking about offering their next gens an opportunity to think about being partner owners. So they've early on planned family meetings, but have quickly handed that responsibility to their next gens. And the next gen said, you know, we're not going to do the 9 to 6:30 day that you guys had designed. We're going to do dinner the night before. We're going to do a morning of content, and we'll pack it in. And then we're going to find something fun to do with the family. And they've invited their spouses, the next gen spouses, to join. They haven't required them. And that's, you know, we've kind of made some deliberate updates to those folks because they've chosen not to attend. So it's been a nice mix of, I think, making folks want to come back, offering some autonomy to a mature group of next gens who can contribute meaningfully to that planning. And I think one other kind of tactic I'd say, like, offer autonomy within a range. So, hey, here's 6 topics we think are really important. Which one would you like? And as the budget, you know, the holders of the purse and the senior gen who's leading this, you will pay for any of those because you think they're all important, but we'll let the next gens choose. But they're also not choosing, you know, like the comedy club down the road. That's a little hard to make the connection to ownership skill sets. So I think, you know, make them want to come back. The education will come. And then the last thing I'd say is, we think a lot about, and it was mentioned in our, you know, 7 elements of an ownership mindset, this idea of both being better together, and it's kind of infused in a lot of them. Almost always in the next gen, there's going to be a bigger group of partners or a team of owners, more so than the prior gen. Having those folks know each other is incredibly important, and knowing each other on a relational basis before they have to make partner decisions together is incredibly powerful. And it's a little hard to recreate that when we have folks over the age of 25, but up to that, we have a bit of a golden window to help cousins get together and just know each other as cousins. And I know Wendy and Gaia will attest to the fact that when we have families who come to engage us and they've spent time together as a family, and it doesn't have to be kumbaya family, but just a little bit of dedicated time so those cousins know who each other are, and there's value placed on understanding who your family members are, that really creates a lot of opportunity to build on that's a foundation to build on the skill development and further relational opportunities. But make the space, like that afternoon that the family I cited, creates to build memories together, to understand each other's people. I've got another family that does cousin camp, and I keep trying to say, hey, do you want me to zoom in and do just a half an hour or something? No, I don't need you. We're just having fun together. And the place they choose to meet is very emotionally important to their family, and they just want the cousins to spend time there because it won't look like that forever. And they think it's important that this generation builds memories there. So, create the space for the team while knowing they're pushing back and they don't want to, follow all the guidance and rules from the family business. Offer the cousins the opportunity to build a relationship, both teaming as they learn, but also just relationship and memory building opportunities, and just make it engaging. And if you need to, get their voice involved so that we can create it in a way that fits for them, so that they just want to come back next time. And they may not be able to, ace the quiz, if you will, after they finish the education, but it's seeping in, and the repetition by coming back again and again, that will build the understanding that we need.
Can I add a point to what Barb just mentioned? Because I see this every day, right? So I deal with these emerging adults from a global perspective. And I'm from Italy. So when we were writing the book, we had tons of conversation about individualistic culture and collectivistic culture. And this has a huge impact on the belief and how it shows. Because in this part of the world, I came to appreciate so much that there is value in the individuality. I come from a place where it's all about the family, and we tend to forget sometimes. And I had a conversation with some students coming from India, and two in particular that just melt my heart. We had this whole great seminar about individualism and understanding what is your identity, what is that you desire, and I call him kid, although it's probably not appropriate, but he followed me after. He goes like, Professor, I have a question for you. What do you mean with having your own identity? I'm like, okay, because it comes from a place in the world where it's all about the us, right? Which is great. And I think I love having people together in a global community, because we can learn from what it means to have a little bit more clarity on what is that I need and want, and what is that the family, and so put the emphasis on that. And so I think that depending on how each family value these two things, making space for that. Yesterday, I had another conversation with the students who, at the beginning of the semester, her dad told her that he's going to sell a bunch of assets and making all the decisions for the future. And she was just reporting back that she just met with the dad. And the conversation really shifted, because after 6 months of her living alone on the other side of the world, she really appreciated the benefit of being more independent minded and be able to show up with the dad. And she was reporting this great win that dad agreed to slow down a little bit and to stay in the conversation and be open to see how things evolve. So I think that sometimes, because we want to be efficient, there are so many things at stake. We want to rush these things, but allowing the seeds to grow and allowing for this next generation. And so I was asking her, what do you think allowed you to show up in front of your dad? And she was like, well, the distance being here. And I said, okay, and how do you think when you go back? Because she wants to go back. She can't wait to go back and be part of that community and her family. And I said, how can you stay true to this ability to speak your mind, even if you are in the presence of your dad and granddad? And she's going to be on a retreat for several days, and she promised she will be thinking about that a lot.
So I'm just going to call out, Barb, one of your cousin camp participants is with us today and has messaged us that the reward of that time has been incredible for their family. So that's an affirmation for cousin camp and the value of that time. And you also talked a little bit about, seizing the opportunities that we have. So we're going to dive into one more area, which is middle adulthood. But I do want to remind folks that we will answer questions after this as time permits, and we'll be happy to follow up after the session. So if you've got questions, please pop them into the chat. Gaia, let's talk about middle adulthood. You guys broadly define that as around 35 to 65. And it might be easy to overlook the opportunity to further develop them as owners, although you were just telling a little bit of a story about, more senior folks and the learnings that they have about this process. So what goals might we consider for ourselves or our families in that middle adulthood stage? And what are some examples of ways we can turn those goals into action?
Sure. So as always, I'm big on context, right? Above all, because when we talk about 35 to 65, hello, we cover basically the whole life. So with the caveat that Barb mentioned about the importance that we're not stuck on the ages, right? But it may be depending. So we like the old adage about the independence. And I think that this is particularly relevant here. So it depends on how individuals have arrived to this stage. So to Barbara's point is after ideally we get to adulthood after a period of exploration. And so if that period of exploration ends up great, then we're ready for commitments. And I think that a great signal that we are actually adults is whether we are able to commit to relationship, to jobs. I have conversation with students where I think that for some reason it is easier for them to decide to get married because they know that they can divorce than to decide to join the family business, because I think that once I'm in, I can never leave. And so that's another belief system, right, that allow them to frame and rethink about how to position that. But back to our story, right? So the ability to make commitments is the key distinguishing factor for adulthood. Mouthful for an Italian. So I think that at this stage, people realize that, wow, this is it, right? I've been preparing so much and now I'm in the seat of the decision maker. And I think that sometimes we have an internal identity. And so we think that we may think that we're still not there, but maybe people start treating us, or worse, if they don't treat us as such, we may need to work on that. And so at this stage, we may finally have a right to have responsibility, with few exceptions. Think Prince Charles, but also he finally made it. And so this is the age where you are too old to be young, but you're also too young to be old. And I think that this is also my age. I was struggling a little bit with that until I realized that, you know what, that's pretty cool because we're both. Meaning that it may sound challenging, but it's quite awesome because we can still experience the excitement to plan and the energy to execute, and combine with the self-confidence that the experience brings us with some growing wisdom, hopefully, right? So in this time, I think it's very important also to think about that, as Wendy was mentioning, we have probably to redesign our identity. I think this is a very important concept because our identity is something that changes across time. So the struggle is in the emergent, because probably it's the first time where we kind of own our own identity compared to what the family always told us. But then we have to renegotiate it. And this is the time that really makes so much sense, right? You may, in this stage, grow up as a parent with kids who are growing up and they challenge you as such. Meanwhile, you still have your parents treating you as a kid. And so how can you show up? Still, when I visit my dad, he reminds me that probably I need an extra layers because it's too cold outside, right? Leave alone. So we tend to renegotiate that. It's also important if you have siblings, because I have a sister, she's 10 years younger than I am. And the minute I realized that I was no longer the big sister, it took us quite a bit to figure out if I'm not the big sister, because the woman now is 40, she may not need a big sister in a way, right? But what does it mean to be adult to adult in our relationship, in the family, and then in the ownership? I remember 3 sisters who were talking about the first board member, the first board meeting they had. And the oldest listened to the youngest, and all of a sudden she said, when did she become so smart? Which was thankfully not a comment she made out loud in the meeting, but right after, right? But it's really rediscovering and understanding that that little sibling, annoying probably it became, and so giving the flexibility for people to recognize who they are. So all these, how does that translate in ownership goals? Well, as mentioned, by now, so by this stage, ideally you have figured the lay of the land. So the complexity that both Barbara and Wendy were talking about in terms of the document legal aspect, by now we have to have figured that out. Now, if we think about this 35 to 65, if you are at the entrance of these, you may be in the time of the life where you have to check with your parents whether estate planning has been done properly because they're aging, and that's another challenge to navigate. And at the same time, if you are on the older side of that, you may have children who start dating and having deeper relationship or new grandchildren. So how does that shape the whole ownership conversation? It's very important, right? At the same time, and this is very interesting, I was talking to a sixth-generation family member who, after being on the board, this family has a quite large ownership composition. So they have a next-gen board, and that kind of train and allow them people to sit on the actual board, so governance-wise. And this young gentleman, he's 40, still young, but he was mentioning how his dad just stepped down from being the chairman and he moved to be sitting on the board. And I think this is a very delicate place because at the same time, you start getting on leadership role in the governance system. And sometimes for you to have space to step in, maybe someone had to step out. And so managing and balancing and being sensitive to that transition is also very important. So it's a challenging time, meaning that you have to take care of the technical aspect, but you have a huge responsibility also in managing the process with people. You are the one who probably have more of a say around the financial side of ownership. And so setting those boundaries of where do we want to invest, how do we want to do things, you have more of a say of being enterprising, meaning are we okay in investing as owners in these asset classes? Do we want to do something different? So, I had someone who called me and said after so many years that he was wishing to be in that driving seat, he realized 3 months into being in the driving seat that, holy cow, I didn't know what it takes, right? So things really get real. So all these leadership skills, managing people, delegating, communicating, relationship building, strategic thinking. So all these kind of things at this point need to be, I wouldn't say done because we're never done, but to a level where people is actually able to do that. And so keeping expanding the knowledge about the business, and as I said, different asset classes, it's very important. My last comment is we tend to explain these things as, oh, easy, this is the list, just do it, right? But we know that it's a huge process that's never done. That's one of the key idea and concept of what we're doing. And it's also hopeful for the future because we have a whole lifetime to keep getting better at these kind of things.
Thank you, Gaia. So we're going to go to questions in just a moment, but before we do, I'd like to just touch on one more key concept out of the book, Wendy, that you can introduce for us, which is, I think we've heard a lot of through our conversation about kind of evolution and growth and things like that. So another critical idea that you guys talk about is the idea of being a learning family. So can you share some thoughts on what it means to be a learning family and how this supports building an owner's mindset?
Yes, absolutely. It's probably one of my most favorite concepts in the book. And we dedicate a whole chapter to it because I think when we think about development, we think individual. And as you can see throughout this whole conversation that we've been having, that it really happens. Yes, it does. Development absolutely happens at the individual level, but it really does happen at the family level too. And it needs to happen at the family level because we need to have a common language. And learning together helps us have a level playing field and a common language for us to work through the complexity of ownership. There are so many layers to this journey that we're on together. And so our ability to get into a room and learn about not only the hard topics, like in my family, you know, we had my cousin Rusty put together a business case and we brought the rising generation in, and we all talked about learning about financial statements. So sometimes it's about the hard stuff, and it's challenging because, of course, there's different levels of capability. Some people already know how to read a financial statement, and other people don't even know what a financial statement is. So it's very hard to sometimes have the patience, but when you can bring everybody in the room together and have those who know helping those who don't really understand, and do that in a really collaborative way, it can just breed cohesion. It breeds commonality. It gives us a common language. It bonds us together. I think that the other piece, though, is also about the soft skills and bringing families together to talk about how do we resolve conflict. Not let's resolve a conflict right now, but let's learn how to do this really well. Let's learn about what trust means, or, hey, I want to understand your communication style better because you tend to communicate very differently than I do, and I'd really like to understand that better. So it can be the soft stuff. I mean, in a couple of weeks, I'm bringing, I'm working with a family right now who unfortunately has a family member with an addiction. And so we're actually coming together, we're having a specialist come in and actually teach us about the substance that that person is addicted to, what happens to the brain, how it is impacting that individual, but also how it impacts a family, and how did they manage it collectively. They're each suffering in their own way, and the impact is significant on the whole family. And so how can they learn about it, learn about setting boundaries? Like, yes, we need to support the person who has that horrible disease, and we also need to have boundaries and take care of ourselves, take care of the parents in this case who are working overtime to support that family member, as are many of the siblings. So our ability, again, to come together and learn creates bonds. It gives us a common language. It helps us really have a level playing field of understanding and skillfulness. So it's a great process to have in your learning, your developmental process as a family. So yeah, I don't know if Gaia and Barb, you want to add anything to that, but yeah.
Well, I just think, as I talked about repetition before, owner groups have to make decisions together. Mm-hmm. And getting together as a learning family in some ways models that group that's going to have to make decisions together. So in the dialogue, the learning together, I think there's a lot of lessons we gain about our partners that allow us to maybe do a better job than when the big, life-threatening types of decisions face owners.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you all for the fantastic overview. We're going to go to questions in just a moment. First, I'd love to invite participants in today's program to share your feedback. You'll get access to a survey directly after this program. We'd love for you to take just a moment or two to share your thoughts. We really do consider those for planning future programs. Also, we want to give everyone access to the book. So the book is available now. It is there is a 20% off discount code, which we are going to put a link into the chat right now, and will also be in the email that you'll receive after the program. If you'd like to run out, order the book, learn more about the concepts that we have discussed today, we encourage you to do that. I think it's a wonderful both capture of many of the things we've talked about today, but also a real handbook for thinking about it much more deeply based on where you are individually, where your family members are, and all of those things. We also want to note that there are additional resources on our website, including recordings of past webinars, an article archive, other books written by members of FBCG. And we do have 2 programs coming up. If you are interested in either family governance or business governance in the fall, all of that information is online. We encourage you to check it out. So with that, we're going to go into questions. And the first question that I'm going to ask, I'm going to pose to you, Barb, to kick us off, which is the most common question in any of these programs is, so I'm really excited about this idea. I feel like all this energy around developing owners. Where do we start?
I think, certainly depends heavily on your family. I'll give the economist standard answer. It depends. I do think that sometimes it has to start with aligning the current owners around what we are willing to say, what we're willing to offer, what we're going to allow next gen owners to have access to, what expectations owners have. So sometimes I run into groups where we've got folks who don't think we should say anything to next gens. It's not worth the money to get them together. We don't want to invest in development. And we maybe have a minority of the current owner group who feels that way and the rest feel differently. And so we can't always wait for that to align, but sometimes starting there is really helpful because it creates an opportunity for them to give clear expectations. Speak with one voice, as we like to have owners be able to do. It's not always easy, as Gaia said. You know, that might be where the work needs to start. Another way that work sometimes needs to start is next gens. I've seen families, I'll do an introductory call and I'll say, hey, I really think the next gen, you know, developing their own team and understanding each other at the cousin level and building these relationships, that's really important. And you'll have a cousin leader that calls his cousins up and they start having a monthly call. Like I've had a couple folks do that. You next gens, like you don't have to wait to be conferred with a location that is fancy and, you know, warm in the winter to get these meetings going. You guys can talk to each other. There's a bazillion resources on our website and elsewhere to get you started with these concepts. Sometimes it's hard to listen to your sibling, your older sibling or cousins who maybe have, you know, kicked your butt around when you guys got together as kids, but, you know, use the mindset idea, maybe shift your beliefs or values and be open to thinking about those older folks in a little bit different way and maybe, you know, test out their leadership a little bit and allow yourself to gather and just get to know each other, learn something simple. I think that those are a couple kind of basic ways to start. And then one other tip I'd say, I mean, family governance is a whole nother topic, and family meetings and how you have them. We've got a webinar on family meetings and how to get them started. Actually, that Wendy and I did a long time ago, I think, but you know, family meetings are really the engine of education. It's not all can happen in family meetings, but it's where a lot of the learning family stuff happens and where a lot of individual development can occur. But a lot of times your family isn't big enough, complex enough, or just not ready for that concept because sometimes family governance is a little hard to get your arms around. I think the idea of a family education committee is really tangible and sometimes a good spot to start. So if you have a few folks or volunteers that want to put their hands up and say, I'll get together and think about what we ought to be learning and how we organize the resources out there, offer them to people. How do we communicate with folks in a way that they can hear us? How do we make them aware of these opportunities? Yeah, I think a family education committee or task force is sometimes a really tangible, accessible way to get started.
Fantastic. We've got more questions rolling in, so I want to take a few before we sign off for the day. One attendee asks, how do you or should you try to change a belief that only employees can be owners, especially when the next gen is interested in ownership, but the parents have this belief?
Can I make a quick comment on that? I think that's very important to understand how beliefs are formed in the timeline of a family, right? Because if I have a few families, clients where this is the ongoing belief, and usually when you dig into a little bit what happened in the previous generation, you find that there was an argument between siblings, and so in order to avoid that outcome, they end up having the same because they put together a solution that become a problem in itself. So I think that from the family piece, family tend to be reactive, meaning that they tend to do the opposite of what didn't work or the same of what worked without really thinking about what is that we need here and now. And so be curious, not judgmental, which I know it's not easy, about why we believe that, what are the story there, and try to understand what things are we trying to solve for in this generation. What are the conditions that change? What are the things that we want to achieve and what we want to avoid? So kind of new page in respect of what happened. Someone mentioned about loyalty, right? Sometimes it feels like, should I be loyal? Should I be happy? Well, you can be both. And so it's how to work together in this win-win.
I think the thing that I would add to that is that sometimes families, we think of ownership as being unidimensional. There's one type of owner. And I think helping, you know, and it probably may need to be a facilitated discussion, but helping the family learn about different types of owners and how that works in a family business, just as from an educational perspective. And then have them sort of talk about, all right, well, what kind of owners do we want to be, each of us? And then how might that work? What are the challenges we might face with that type of ownership? So again, it may need to be a facilitated dialogue, but I think it starts with an education and understanding of what different types of owners there are, and how they work, what role they play, and then what that might fit for their family. I think it is a very common belief, though, that only employees can be owners. It's not unusual that we see that. So helping evolve the family's understanding of ownership is really, really helpful. And, sometimes I say, what is it that you want, to the senior generation? What's your vision? What do you want your family to be like in the future, and how does the business play into that? And so that also gets them thinking about their vision and what success looks like for them.
I think it's a great call out, Wendy, because as I think about, as a firm that's been doing this work for 30 years, I think there's been a significant evolution in how in all of the creative problem solving around thinking about ownership and what it means and how to engage people. And you're right, there was maybe one primary view of what it looks like a number of years ago, and there's a lot of different ways to tackle that now.
Yeah, you know what? Sorry, Christy, I'm just going to add one other thing. I think the other thing the family might benefit from talking about is when you don't, sort of think about ownership more broadly, the impact can be also incredibly negative on the family. So exploring that as well from a learning perspective, I think can be helpful. Sorry.
Good. Right. Appreciate that. A related question is, if you have a member of the family who is not interested in bringing the family together, who is obstructing efforts to bring the family together, should you work around that person? How do you think about bringing together owners for this kind of development when not all family members are supportive of that kind of initiative, or actively working against it in some cases?
Mm-hmm. I'm happy to take that, but I don't know, Barb, did you want to take it?
Go ahead, Wendy.
I think it's incredibly complex. I think that and I'm going to use a phrase that both Gaia and Barb have said on this call, and I think we probably say very often, which is, it depends. If you've seen one family enterprise, you've seen one family enterprise, because we're all so different. And so I think it depends on the scenario. Sometimes it's about not allowing one person to stall the continuity planning, and be the gatekeeper of really the progress that the family can make. I'll just give you an example. There was one young man who didn't want to participate in the rising generation. And so we allowed that. We said, great, we want you to be here. We invite you to be here. We're going to let you know of every meeting. We're going to send you the summary notes of every meeting. And we really encourage you to reconsider, but we want to respect where you're at and appreciate that you're in a place in your life right now where that doesn't work for you. But we need to really move forward because we have either health issues or whatever's going on that's, needing to advance continuity in the family. So that just gives an example of where, again, respecting that person wanting to not participate, but not allowing the family to be, stalled, because progress is important on continuity, and it takes a long time. It can take decades to transition. And so getting started, the sooner the better.
Can I say one quick thing? I don't know with time, but I think that we often form beliefs on why people are obstructing, and these are biases, right? And usually they're never nice biases when we think about why people don't do things. And so really try to spend time, depending on the level of emotional energy dissipated or generated in the family, about why people are against, what is that is happening there. I think when we can have that learning head on, even in family reaction and individual reaction, we can really advance so much and make people feel heard and understood, which at the end of the day is what people care the most, and it's the core need of everyone. And I'm not Pollyanna. I understand these things are extremely difficult to win this point.
Well, and I'd just tack on to that there's an assumption implied there that we need unanimity. And when we don't decide how we're going to decide before we have to decide, we often default, well, we must have to have everybody in favor. And to Gaia's point, it's incredibly difficult. And usually in these situations, it's not the time to make these calls. But for those of you who are before this kind of situation, talk about how the family's going to make decisions. Is that a family decision or an owner decision? Owners usually decide a little bit differently than family do, as does the board. And so if you can early on make some of those, like, again, we're not talking about big fancy meetings or just a few couple of decisions around how we're going to conduct ourselves. It can really help us when we get into these sticky parts, because then we know, well, we are gonna, if we have somebody who, if we can't get to consensus, we're gonna listen to them, understand them, and then we may need to respectfully do a vote and move on. But then we tell people what to expect before we get into the difficulty. And I think it really helps retain relationships often in the face of those differences of opinion or strong feelings about whether we tell next gen something or not.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are at time. As we close, I want to reflect on a couple of things that I heard in the discussion today. I heard that we should seize the opportunities that we have, that repetition and patience are important, that we think about both individual needs and collective needs and how those things relate to each other. Stay curious in learning about other people's perspectives and in your own development, and to just start. That is both never too early and never too late to take some of these actions. So I'd love to thank our panelists today for sharing their expertise and all of the knowledge that came from developing this wonderful asset that is this book, that I hope that everybody will go out and take advantage of. Thank you all for being with us today.
And thank you, Christy, for hosting us and taking us through this, and also for stewarding us through the whole publication of this book. It's really appreciated. And of course, to Gaia and Barb, I can't imagine having two better co-authors and on this journey, all the patience and persistence and perseverance that you showed. So thank you very much. It's been a great journey.
It has. Thank you, everyone.